Hello to all the wonderful listeners of Sci-fi Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to keep operating. If you enjoy the story today, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking staff and continue creating epic sci-fi tales for you. You can donate by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the link in the description or the pinned comment. The heavy metallic ramp of the Galactic Council transport slammed into the jagged surface of Cocytus, and the airlocks hissed open, expelling 3,000 condemned souls into the void. We were pushed forward, a tide of unwanted humanity, herded by the silent electric prods of the Council guards. As my boots touched the ground, the great metal doors sealed behind us, locking away the only artificial warmth we had known for months. I stood at the edge of the crowd, an outcast among outcasts, a former geological engineer, now branded as garbage by the rulers of the stars. I looked out over the expanse of our new home, the Class-9 death world, known as Cocytus. It was a landscape of pure, unadulterated hostility. Stretching out to the dark horizon was an ocean, not of water, but of liquid mercury. Its surface was completely smooth, a giant silver mirror reflecting a pale, dying sun. There were no waves, no ripples, just a heavy, toxic stillness. Rising from this metallic sea were continents of jagged silicon crystal. The ground beneath us was translucent, sharp, and unforgiving. It felt less like a planet and more like a graveyard waiting for corpses. As the initial shock wore off, a strange sensation swept through the crowd. A man next to me took a step and stumbled, but he did not fall hard. He practically floated, landing gently on his knees. The gravity here was incredibly weak, roughly 0.6 g. A murmur rippled through the masses. I saw tired faces suddenly brighten with a foolish, desperate hope. Their bodies felt light, unburdened by the crushing despair of our sentence. For a fleeting second, they thought the Council had made a fatal error, that they had dropped us onto a paradise of effortless movement. They stretched their arms, taking deep, relieved breaths of the alien air. That was their first mistake. My engineering instincts screamed at me. I swallowed hard and felt a sharp stabbing ache deep inside my skull. The atmospheric pressure was terrifyingly low. The air was so thin it felt like trying to breathe on the edge of space. The pressure differential was building up behind our eardrums, threatening to blow them out from the inside. But what terrified me more than the pressure was the absolute crushing silence. A world without wind, without the rustle of leaves, without the crashing of water. The silence was heavy, wrapping around us like a physical weight. I took a cautious breath, testing the composition of the air. It tasted metallic, dry, and distinctly sharp. My mind raced, analyzing the environment. Ultrafine silica dust. The atmosphere was saturated with microscopic crystalline shards. Because the air was so still, the dust did not swirl. It simply hung there, an invisible mist of razor blades. With every breath my fellow humans took, they were inhaling glass. The silica dust was silently embedding itself into the soft, pink tissue of their lungs. There was no immediate coughing, no burning sensation to warn them. It was a quiet, painless execution. Every breath drew them closer to suffocation. A deep bass vibration shook the crystal ground, snapping my attention back to the Council transport. The massive thrusters ignited. On Earth, the sound would have shattered windows for miles. Here, there was only a muted thud felt through the soles of our boots. The colossal ship rose into the dark sky, abandoning us to the silence. As it breached the upper layers of the thin atmosphere, a blinding holographic projection flashed across the heavens. The alien text translated instantly through our neural implants, glowing violently against the dark sky. Expected survival time 45 days. The cruel mockery of the message broke whatever fragile hope the weak gravity had built. Pure panic erupted. Beside me, a large man with wild eyes lost his mind. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He raised his fists toward the fading light of the council ship, his chest heaving as he drew in a massive amount of the crystal-laden air. He opened his mouth wide, preparing to unleash a primal scream of defiance and hatred. He pushed the air out of his lungs with every ounce of strength he possessed. But Cocytus refused to give him a voice. The atmosphere was simply too thin to carry the vibration of his vocal cords. The glorious scream he intended was reduced to a pathetic hollow hiss. That violent exhalation in the extreme low pressure sealed his doom. I watched in frozen horror as his chest cavity expanded unnaturally and then violently collapsed. His lungs, already sliced open by the silica dust and unable to withstand the sudden explosive shift in pressure, ruptured entirely. It was a massive, catastrophic pneumothorax. Thick, dark blood sprayed from his lips, bubbling as it met the freezing vacuum of the air. He dropped to the jagged crystal floor, clutching his chest, his eyes wide in silent, unspeakable agony. His body convulsed twice, and then he lay still. He died in absolute silence, while 3,000 of his peers watched, paralyzed by terror. The crowd was frozen, their minds unable to process the silent slaughter. I knew that if panic took hold, they would all start screaming, and they would all die just like him. We had to move. We needed dense air. We needed depth. I reached down to my heavy utility belt and unclipped the only possession the council had let me keep: my old survey axe. The familiar weight of the carbon handle grounded me, bringing sharp focus to my racing mind. I could not shout orders. I could not speak a single word to calm them down. I stepped over the dead man and raised the axe high above my head. The polished metal caught the dull reflection of the Mercury Ocean, drawing the terrified eyes of the survivors. I pointed the head of the axe toward a massive gaping fissure in the crystal cliffs a mile away. It was the entrance to a deep, subterranean cave system. I locked eyes with the people nearest to me. I swung my arm in a wide, aggressive arc, pointing down into the dark abyss. Down there, closer to the planetary core, the atmospheric pressure would be heavier. Down there, we might find air thick enough to keep our organs from exploding. I did not wait to see if they understood my crude hand signals. I gripped my axe tightly and started marching toward the darkness, praying the rest of humanity would follow before their lungs turned to stone. By year 3, the damp, crushing dark of the lower caverns had claimed 2,100 of us. Only 900 remained, breathing the heavy, stale air of the deep abyss. Down here, the atmospheric pressure was finally high enough to keep our lungs intact, but the planet had other ways to execute us. I mapped the thermal gradients using my old survey axe and discovered a terrifying truth. Cocytus did not have a standard day and night cycle. The dim, violent light filtering through the translucent rock was not from a distant sun, but directly from the planetary core. It was emitting brutal, shortwave radiation. This invisible fire bathed our subterranean refuge constantly, hyper-accelerating cellular mutation. Cancer was growing in our bodies at a staggering, terrifying speed. Tumors blossomed like dark, unnatural flowers under our skin in a matter of weeks. We were forced into crude, agonizing surgeries, cutting the corrupted flesh from each other using sterilized survey knives, just to buy another few months of life. Despair was a luxury we simply could not afford. We were dying, but we were also engineers, mechanics, and scientists. If the planet wanted to act like a giant radioactive battery, we were going to plug our minds right into it. I gathered the remaining technical crew. Using the heavy laser cutters salvaged from dead planetary survey gear, we began etching massive, intricate patterns directly into the cavern walls. The entire geological makeup of Cocytus was natural semiconductor silicon. We did not need to build tiny, fragile motherboards. We were living inside a planet-sized one. We carved crude, but massive optical logic circuits across the glowing crystal surfaces, using the ambient core radiation as a power source. We turned the very walls of our geological prison into raw, towering computing power, calculating our survival equations on a massive scale. We did not have organic beasts to hunt on this dead rock. There were no animals, no plants, no biological life to sustain us. Instead, our hunting parties tracked violent geological anomalies. We hunted volatile geothermal energy currents and rogue subterranean veins of liquid mercury. The optical processors we carved into the walls ran incredibly hot under the intense core radiation. To keep our makeshift cave computers from melting into useless slag, we had to divert those fast-flowing mercury rivers into intricate cooling trenches. We dug these channels by hand, blistering our skin as we guided the heavy, toxic silver liquid through the processor caverns. The fluid mercury acted as a massive planetary heat sink, glowing violently as it absorbed the thermal exhaust of our growing machine. It was a brutal, exhausting existence, but it kept the processors firing and the calculations running. We needed to return to the upper levels to map more mercury veins, but the silent killer of silica dust still waited for us up there. We solved it with the very material that tried to kill us. By tapping into a high-yield geothermal vent, we created a massive blast furnace hot enough to melt the raw crystal floor. We drew the molten silicon out into microscopic, flexible threads, weaving crude but highly effective fiberglass materials. We layered these sharp threads into thick, heavy-breathing masks. When we strapped them tight to our scarred faces, the microglass fibers caught every single lethal particle of silica dust. We could finally walk the upper caverns, inhaling safely through our own manufactured glass filters without bleeding out from the inside. Yet the crushing physical silence of the world still isolated us. Communication was strictly restricted to frantic hand gestures and heavy chalk lines drawn on the rock. That barrier broke during a massive localized radiation flare from the core. I was leaning my head against a central logic node, trying to manually calculate a new mercury flow rate, when a sudden massive spike in piezoelectric resonance hit the crystal. I felt a violent electric hum travel directly up my spine and into my skull. My vision blurred heavily. But then, a sudden crystal-clear thought pierced the dark of my mind. It was not my thought. It was a complex mathematical fluid dynamics equation belonging to Sarah, a structural engineer standing 40 feet away. I turned my head sharply. She was staring right at me, her eyes wide with the exact same terrifying realization. Our human brains, operating on complex electrical impulses, were capable of acting as organic receivers. When pressed against the active semiconductor crystal, our neural frequencies synchronized perfectly with the natural vibrational frequency of the planet itself. We had discovered a form of raw, logical telepathy. I realized instantly what this meant for our survival. We did not need to force air through vocal cords. We did not need fragile sound waves in a thin atmosphere. We could use the crystal veins running through the caves as physical data cables for our minds. We did not waste a single hour. We began grafting raw conductive crystal nodes directly into our protective environmental suits, positioning the sharp nodes precisely against the base of our skulls. We physically wired our bodies into the massive optical computers we had built on the walls. One by one, the 900 survivors plugged their raw consciousness into the living rock. The silence that had tortured us for 3 agonizing years shattered in a single brilliant instant. My mind flooded completely with the thoughts, calculations, fears, and brilliant engineering ideas of 900 human beings. We were no longer isolated individuals stumbling blindly in the dark. We merged our biological human ingenuity with the raw, relentless silicon power of Cocytus. We built a sprawling artificial neural network that spanned the entire cavern system. In the cold, radioactive dark of a Class-9 death world, humanity forced its own evolution. We became a singular apex intelligence, a brilliant, deeply connected symphony of naked brains calculating our vengeance in perfect unified harmony. By year 6, Our desperate cavern refuge had evolved into an impregnable fortress. We named it Silicon Heart. It was no longer a mere hiding place scraped out of the dark. It was a sprawling, underground metropolis, carved deep into the dense, crystalline bedrock. Towering pillars of translucent rock supported high, vaulted ceilings, all pulsing with the steady, rhythmic light of our optical logic circuits. To protect our sanctuary from the deadly surface elements, we had constructed massive containment dams. These monumental structures held back millions of gallons of liquid mercury, acting as both an impenetrable defensive barrier and an immense thermal regulation system. The heavy metal reservoirs were entirely managed by the living rock, governed by automated crystal processors that continuously calculated pressure variables and structural integrity. It was in the glowing, artificial twilight of these mercury reserves that the next generation of our species took its first breath. The birth of the first child of Cocytus was a profound historical milestone. Yet, it happened in absolute, unnatural silence. The infant did not cry. Evolution, accelerated by the brutal environment and our deep neural integration, had already begun to physically alter human biology. The child was born with vocal cords that were entirely dormant, useless flaps of tissue in a world where sound vibration was a death sentence. But nature had compensated with terrifying efficiency. The infant possessed an occipital lobe, nearly twice the size of a standard human brain. Where the original survivors relied on grafted sensors, this child could naturally perceive the invisible spectrums of extreme danger. They could look down a dark, seemingly empty tunnel and physically see the deadly shortwave radiation bands painting the air in vivid, terrifying colors of violet and deep red. They were the first true native apex predator of the death world. I had become the undisputed architect of our survival, the central commanding node of our collective mind. The extreme physical toll of leadership was etched violently into my flesh. My body was a horrific roadmap of jagged scars, the brutal aftermath of cutting away dozens of radiation-induced tumors over the past years. I had literally carved away pieces of my own humanity to stay alive. Yet, the most striking physiological change was not the missing flesh. Prolonged neural synchronization with the planetary core had permanently altered my biology. My eyes no longer held the dull, exhausted stare of a stranded, broken engineer. They burned continuously with a piercing, vibrant blue light, permanently charged by the piezoelectric currents of the surrounding silicon crust. Under my strict guidance, we had stopped merely surviving and had begun to actively conquer the hostile geology. Deep within the lower mantle, our hunting parties discovered spontaneous electromechanical entities. These were massive, jagged blocks of raw, conductive crystal that moved autonomously, driven by the intense, stratigraphic electrical currents flowing fiercely through the planetary crust. They were mindless geological golems, forces of pure destruction. Using our established neural network, we hacked their rudimentary electrical impulses, bending their chaotic energy to our collective will. We harnessed these towering, silent crystal beasts, transforming them into tireless, brutal mining tools. They carved out new, massive expansions for Silicon Heart, their enormous crystalline limbs crushing through the solid bedrock without shedding a single drop of sweat or blood. But Cocytus was a world that abhorred stability. The severe crisis struck without any preliminary warning during a routine expansion operation of the northern sector. A sudden, massive thermal spike originating in the upper strata caused an immediate optical pressure overload within the primary crystal processors controlling the uppermost containment dam. The logic circuits violently fractured under the extreme mathematical strain, and the physical containment barriers catastrophically failed. A terrifying, bone-rattling tremor shook the foundational pillars of Silicon Heart. A localized flood of liquid mercury, immensely heavy and utterly destructive, violently breached the ceiling of the northern cavern. It was not a flood of water. It was a cascading waterfall of dense, toxic metal, weighing thousands upon thousands of tons, pouring down from the upper surface with apocalyptic, crushing force. It devoured everything in its immediate path, dissolving our intricate upper cooling trenches and threatening to drown the entire residential sector in a suffocating, inescapable wave of heavy liquid silver. Pure panic spiked sharply through our neural network, a blinding, chaotic burst of collective terror that threatened to sever our connection. I did not reach for my survey axe. Physical muscular strength was utterly useless against a tidal wave of heavy metal. Instead, I slammed my consciousness into the central neural node, violently seizing absolute control of the collective hive mind. Through the grafted crystal, deeply embedded at the base of my skull, I broadcasted a commanding, unyielding directive directly into the brains of the 900 connected survivors. Do not run. Anchor your thoughts to my frequency. Now. I forced their chaotic, desperate fear into a single, highly focused mental channel. I forcefully synchronized our scattered brainwaves, aligning the raw electrical output of 900 human minds into one synchronized, devastating resonant frequency. We temporarily became a singular, massive biological battery. We pushed this immense combined mental energy down deep through the crystal bedrock, aiming it directly at the volatile piezoelectric fault line running dangerously beneath the breached cavern floor. We triggered a localized, catastrophic electromagnetic pulse. The invisible, crushing shockwave erupted upward from the bedrock, colliding violently with the descending cascading wave of liquid mercury. The intense electromagnetic interference instantly disrupted the fluid atomic structure of the heavy metal. In a blinding, spectacular flash of stark blue energy, the kinetic momentum of the catastrophic flood simply ceased to exist. The chaotic, roaring waterfall of mercury froze instantly in midair, violently solidifying into a massive, impenetrable wall of dense, hard metallic alloy. The apocalyptic crisis was over in a matter of seconds. The northern residential sector was permanently sealed behind a towering, shimmering barrier of solidified silver. I slowly disconnected my mind from the central node. My breathing was incredibly ragged, and the glowing blue light in my eyes dimmed slightly from the immense, draining neurological exertion. I walked slowly toward the newly formed massive metal barricade. The freshly frozen surface was perfectly smooth, acting as a gigantic, flawless mirror in the dim, pulsing light of the cavern. I looked deeply at my reflection. I saw the brutal, ugly scars, the glowing, inhuman eyes, and towering closely behind me, I saw the hardened, utterly unyielding faces of my people. We had stopped a planetary-level disaster, not with our fragile physical hands, but with our unified, weaponized will. We had successfully bent the raw, deadly elements of this Class-9 world to serve our absolute needs. Looking at that towering, solid mercury wall, the truth settled heavily and permanently into my mind. We were no longer the fragile, terrified refugees shivering hopelessly in the dark. We were the absolute masters of the deep, and Cocytus was finally yielding to its new, undisputed kings. Early in year 10, the dark sky above Cocytus tore open, but not with a roar of engines. A Galactic Council stealth probe slipped through the thin, razor-sharp atmosphere like a ghost. It was encased in a shifting, volatile plasma energy shell, deployed for a singular, horrific purpose. It was an automated executioner, sent to sanitize the planet and erase the final, lingering traces of humanity. This advanced machine was a masterpiece of deep space assassination technology. It operated without generating a single mechanical hum. It vented zero thermal exhaust into the freezing vacuum. To every conventional optical and thermal sensor we had scavenged over the decade, the rocky surface remained entirely empty. It was a perfect, invisible phantom hunting in the dark, designed to kill us before we even knew we were being targeted. But the arrogant architects of the Council did not understand the planet they had exiled us to. They did not know that Cocytus was no longer just a sphere of rock and liquid metal. It was a living, breathing extension of our collective minds. Deep inside the protective walls of Silicon Heart, I felt the intrusion instantly. It was not a blinking dot on a radar screen. It was a sharp, sickening numbness, scraping across the very edge of my consciousness. The probe was heavily shielded against biological frequencies, which inadvertently created a terrifying anomaly within our planetary neural network. I felt a cold, moving void, a dead zone of absolute silence cutting a brutal path through the constant, comforting hum of the crystal crust. I severed my administrative connection to the main grid and grabbed my weapon. We did not rely on scavenged rifles or crude explosives anymore. We armed ourselves with heavy javelins forged from dense piezoelectric crystal, capable of storing massive, highly compressed kinetic charges. I signaled my elite hunting cadre through a tight, localized neural link. Shadow Protocol, move to the surface. We have an anomaly. We moved out of the deep caverns and onto the jagged surface, becoming silent. Predatory shadows, blending perfectly into the razor-sharp silicon dunes. We tracked the moving void of thought, sprinting across the low-gravity terrain in absolute, coordinated silence. We positioned ourselves on a high, overhanging crystal ridge, looking down into a dry basin where the invisible void had momentarily paused its search pattern. I raised my hand to signal the coordinated strike, but the machine was terrifyingly fast. It did not need optical lenses to see us. Its advanced quantum sensors immediately detected the microfluctuations in the local electromagnetic field caused by the heavy kinetic charges stored in our spears. The thin, still air suddenly and violently warped. A blinding, searing ring of pure white energy expanded outward from the center of the dead basin. It was a molecular disintegration wave. The hunter kneeling directly to my right, a fierce young woman named Alara, did not even have a fraction of a second to react. The white wave hit her perfectly woven fiberglass armor and passed straight through flesh and bone. There was no kinetic explosion. There was no spray of blood. In a terrifying instant, her entire physical form simply unraveled at the atomic level. She ignited into a blinding pillar of violent light, her molecular bonds shattering simultaneously. She dissolved into glowing, digital ash that drifted silently away on the toxic air. She died without a single sound, erased from existence in absolute, terrifying silence. A cold, calculating rage flooded my nervous system. I did not order a retreat. I vaulted directly off the jagged ridge, plummeting 60 feet down toward the dead center of the basin. The low gravity slowed my descent, giving me a terrifying, suspended moment to lock onto my target. I focused entirely on the faint, shimmering optical distortion of the plasma shell. I gripped my heavy crystal spear with both hands, channeling every ounce of my physical strength and raw neural energy into the weapon. I slammed boots first into the unseen hull, driving the piezoelectric spear violently downward with crushing force. The dense, silicon weapon pierced the advanced energy shielding with a blinding flash. I hit the central plasma core. The arrogant galactic technology was never designed to interact with a weapon made of pure, hyperconductive planetary crystal. The spear acted as a massive, instantaneous grounding rod. It violently absorbed the entire output of the probe's plasma reactor, channeling the catastrophic energy surge straight back into the machine's own delicate internal circuitry. A violent, silent shockwave of blue lightning arced wildly across the invisible hull. The optical camouflage shattered instantly, revealing the sleek, black metallic chassis of the probe just as it completely short-circuited. The deadly machine sparked violently once, its core overloaded, and crashed heavily onto the crystal floor, completely dead. We dragged the heavy, scorched chassis of the Council probe deep into the glowing heart of our underground fortress. The engineers, their faces illuminated by the harsh blue light of the optical processors, immediately descended upon the dead machine. We bypassed its fried external defenses and forcefully spliced our raw crystal data cables directly into its heavily armored memory core. The decryption process was grueling. It took hours of brute force calculations, utilizing the combined processing power of our entire cavern network to crack the sophisticated alien encryption algorithms. But the machine eventually surrendered its secrets, as the raw data flooded directly into our collective neural network. A chilling, absolute silence fell over the minds of the 900 survivors. We had spent an entire decade believing that our exile to this Class-9 death world was a straightforward execution. We believed the Galactic Council had simply thrown us into the dark to suffocate, mutate, and die. We were fundamentally wrong. The truth, meticulously documented in the classified military logs of the probe, was infinitely more sinister. The Council never intended for Cocytus to be our graveyard. They had deliberately selected this specific, highly volatile planet precisely because it was a massive, dormant, toxic weapon incubator, and we were the final, crucial biological ingredient required to arm it. The political architecture of the galaxy was shifting. The logs revealed a massive, brewing conflict with a formidable rival species expanding rapidly on the outer rim of the known universe. The Council needed a weapon of unprecedented, apocalyptic scale to eliminate this threat without leaving a direct trail of evidence that could spark a massive multi-galactic war. They looked at humanity, a species famous for its terrifying, stubborn ability to adapt to extreme physical trauma, and saw the perfect detonator. They knew our biology would be forced to interact with the piezoelectric crystal of the planet just to survive. They mathematically calculated that our desperate, evolving brainwaves would eventually synchronize with the deep geological frequencies of the core. They did not exile us to die. They exiled us so our minds would act as biological jumper cables, slowly and continuously charging the immense, latent energy stored deep within the crystalline mantle. Their grand, genocidal design was staggering in its absolute cruelty. By fighting so hard to live, by building our neural network and taming the planetary currents, we had unknowingly armed a planet-sized space-time bomb. Once the planet reached maximum charge, the Council planned to remotely detonate Cocytus, ripping a catastrophic tear in the fabric of space that would annihilate their rivals on the galactic rim. The final, brilliant stroke of their political masterpiece was the blame. The subsequent investigation would show that primitive humans, messing with forces beyond their comprehension in a desperate bid for survival, had accidentally triggered the planetary collapse. We were going to be wiped out entirely, and our ashes would be blamed for the slaughter of billions of innocent lives. A sudden, sharp spike of terror ripped through our shared consciousness as the engineers hit the final line of code. The probe had not just been sent to observe and sanitize. It was the trigger. In the fraction of a second, before my spear had completely destroyed its main plasma reactor, the machine had managed to compress and broadcast a single, heavily encrypted tight beam transmission back to the Council fleet, waiting in the dark space beyond our system. The decoded text hovered in our collective minds, glowing with a cold, absolute finality. Human host has successfully activated the deep crystal core. Planetary charge is at optimal capacity. Destruction sequence initiated. Event horizon will occur in exactly 24 hours. A massive shockwave of pure, unadulterated despair crashed through the neural network. I could feel the collective panic rising rapidly, the bitter taste of utter defeat choking the minds of my people. We had fought so hard, suffered so much, carved a kingdom out of toxic rock, only to realize we were nothing but expendable pawns in a rigged galactic chess match. The horrific realization threatened to completely shatter our hard-won sanity. I forcefully disconnected the engineers and seized the central communication node, flooding the grid with my own cold, unwavering focus. I pushed the panic down, silencing the terrified murmurs echoing in the hive mind. I stood alone in the center of the command cavern, my scarred face bathed in the sterile light of the processors. I did not project a single ounce of fear. I did not offer hollow comfort, and I absolutely refused to entertain the concept of surrender or chaotic evacuation. I broadcasted my thoughts with the heavy, undeniable weight of a hardened commander who had already conquered hell. "They want a bomb," I asked, my mental voice echoing like thunder through the minds of every man, woman, and child in the fortress. "They think they can use our will to live as a weapon of mass destruction, and then sweep us under the rug of history. We are not going to defuse this world. We will give them the apocalypse they so desperately ordered, but the target will change." Exactly 24 hours later, the dark, heavily scarred sky above Cocytus tore open. 50 pristine, gold-plated supercruisers belonging to the Galactic Council, Purge Fleet, materialized flawlessly in low orbit. They hung there against the starry void, a shining, arrogant testament to the Council's unimaginable wealth and absolute, unyielding cruelty. They had not come to fight. They had come to watch an execution, to witness our fiery, spectacular end, and to casually harvest the chaotic weapon fragments left behind in the radioactive dust. Deep inside the shielded bridge of the flagship, I knew the High Commander was watching his orbital monitors, his face twisted into a cold, triumphant smile. Down below, the crystal core of Cocytus began to glow with a violent, deadly purple luminescence. The deep geological layers thrummed with apocalyptic energy, sending massive seismic shockwaves across the surface, signaling that the piezoelectric chain reaction had reached its absolute peak. To the Council fleet safely hovering in space, it looked exactly like the terrifying final seconds of a dying world about to crack wide open. But the arrogant lords of the galaxy had made one fatal, fundamental miscalculation. They assumed we had spent the last 10 years merely surviving, hiding in the dark from the harsh elements like terrified, cornered animals. They never stopped to realize what we were actually building down in the crushing depths. We did not just carve crude survival circuits into the rock to keep the air flowing. Brad Becker and the brilliant human engineers had spent an entire decade painstakingly transforming the complete semiconductor crystal structure of the planet into a colossal, planet-sized quantum computer. And those vast, toxic oceans of liquid mercury on the surface. We had not just diverted them for simple geothermal cooling. Through years of intense neural synchronization, we had magnetized and perfectly aligned every single metallic molecule within them, turning the entire planetary hydrosphere into a hyperconductive, ultra-massive broadcasting antenna system. We did not panic as the core reached critical mass. We did not attempt to reverse the detonation sequence, nor did we try to halt the apocalyptic bomb they had so carefully armed. Instead, we completely hijacked it. Through our perfectly unified neural network, 900 human minds slammed simultaneously into the planetary core operating system, effortlessly overriding the Council's primitive, remote detonation codes. We took that unimaginably vast surge of raw piezoelectric energy meant to shatter the very fabric of our world, and aggressively redirected its flow. We forced the immense power up through the mercury oceans, mathematically shaping it into a massive, inverted space, time locator pulse. Cocytus did not explode. The violently glowing violet light, radiating from the core, suddenly condensed, shooting straight upward through the thin atmosphere in a blinding, solid pillar of concentrated quantum energy. It struck the exact orbital coordinates of the Golden Fleet with pinpoint, devastating accuracy. A colossal, tearing rift in reality ripped open the cold vacuum of space, a gigantic teleportation gateway born entirely from human rage and planetary power. But the gateway did not send a weapon out into the galaxy. It brought the enemy directly in. The immense, combined gravitational pressure, and heavily warped magnetic fields generated by our planet-sized computer immediately locked onto the 50 supercruisers. Instantly, the sophisticated orbital buoyancy of the massive alien ships completely vanished. The crushing magnetic tether violently yanked the entire Golden Armada out of the safe vacuum of space. They were dragged downward, falling like golden moths with completely broken wings. The sky burned fiercely, with the terrifying friction of 50 massive, heavy hulls plummeting uncontrollably through the razor-sharp atmosphere. They slammed into the jagged crystal deserts with earth-shattering, apocalyptic kinetic force. The deafening, metallic roar of grinding hulls and shattering silicon finally broke the 10-year physical silence of the surface world. The pristine, supposedly indestructible golden armor crumpled like cheap tin against the absolute, unforgiving hardness of the Cocytus crust. The impact was utterly devastating. Their highly advanced, sterile air filtration systems were instantly obliterated upon crashing. The perfectly sealed, perfectly safe environment of the Council elite was violently and permanently breached, exposing them completely to the heavy, toxic reality of the death world they had chosen for us. The invisible, hanging mist of razor-sharp silica dust immediately flooded their ruined command bridges and shattered hallways, while the heavy, suffocating pools of liquid mercury began to rapidly seep through the fractured, burning bulkheads of their lower decks. I stepped slowly out of the deep subterranean cavern and into the violent, violet light of the dying afternoon. I was fully clad in my heavy combat armor, meticulously woven from flexible fiberglass and highly conductive crystal nodes. I walked deliberately to the absolute edge of the highest, sharpest precipice, looking down into the ruined, burning valley below. The magnificent Golden Fleet was now nothing more than a smoking, shattered graveyard. The supreme, untouched rulers of the galaxy, the grand architects of our intended genocide, were desperately dragging themselves out of the twisted wreckage. They collapsed heavily onto the jagged crystal ground, gasping frantically for air, coughing up thick dark blood as the silica dust effortlessly shredded their soft, unadapted, privileged lungs. They knelt in absolute, pathetic helplessness beneath the terrifying purple sky of our home, choking on the very death they had sentenced us to endure. I did not need to speak a single physical word. I tapped deeply into the massive broadcasting power of the Mercury oceans, aggressively hacking into the shattered, sparking communication arrays of the fallen fleet. I projected my raw neural signature, heavily amplified by the untamed power of the planetary core, directly into the terrified minds of every council member bleeding on the crystal floor. I did not stop there. I pushed the signal outward, broadcasting it through the Galactic relay network to every single listening post, every homeworld, and every ruling parliament in the entire galaxy. "You threw us into a Class-9 death world to go extinct," my mental voice thundered, vibrating with the cold, collective, unyielding wrath of humanity. 10 years later, we did not just master it. Now, this planet obeys us. Welcome, the Council, to the land of humanity. Thank you so much to all our amazing listeners for staying with us through this incredible journey. We would absolutely love to know where in the world you are listening to this story from today. So please let us know down in the comments. If you truly enjoyed this epic sci-fi adventure, please consider helping our channel out. With just a $1 donation, you can directly help us pay our hardworking staff, allowing them to support their families and continue creating even more amazing stories to entertain you. You can easily support us by scanning the QR code right here on the screen, or by clicking the donation link provided in the video description and the pinned comment below. Thank you again for your time, and we will see you in the next universe.